Very good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's uLaw webinar. Today's webinar's topic is the handling of additional parties within the uLawPractice platform. Today's webinar is not accredited for any CPD credits. I repeat that it is not accredited for any CPD credits. We're hoping that the session will be more of a demonstration of one of the most key capabilities of the uLaw platform and how we're evolving that feature every day as the requirements change, which is about the concept of adding multiple parties and contact information within a specific file or a matter, and how the association of these parties within the matter and the relationship that these parties present into the matter reflect not only in the documentation that you produce for your clients, such as joint retainer or an engagement letter, but also can be repurposed to utilize within certain important documents, such as the court forms that certain styles of practice require you as a legal professional to submit as part of your file keeping. Court forms such as a plaintiff's claim, an LATB form, there's eviction of tenant, maybe increase or changes in rent. These are all documents or forms, the format of which has been regulated by the appropriate governing bodies that then create these forms, make them available on their individual websites. And typically, legal professionals would download these forms as on a need basis and then fill out repetitive information, which predominantly involves contact information and writing the right contact information under the right party association, and of course, any other more relevant information that is specific to the case. What we've tried to accomplish as part of our practice management and as part of our pursuit to help legal professionals stay more efficient, save time, we've introduced this feature called additional parties, and we're going to walk through some of the examples of these types of parties. We take an example of LATB, we could maybe take an example of family law, and kind of showcase to you how we help clients today reduce the amount of time that they otherwise would have required to fill out these forms. In some court forms, again, really coming down to the amount of information that can be repurposed, we can fill almost as close to 90% of the form itself. In some other cases, it may vary, as I said, based on the amount of information that we already have captured. Now, additional parties also plays an important role in determining the conflict checks. It really helps you build a better business case when you're looking at the different conflicts that certain individuals may present based on their association in the past with other files that you've dealt with. So for example, if you've actually dealt with a particular individual, maybe he was a tenant in a totally different matter, and you had represented the landlord, when the same individual comes back to you or your firm and wants your legal representation, it is critical that you have a system that can search up your database or search up the system that you have in place and highlight that you actually have had the opportunity to have known this person through a previous file representation, and that this person was associated as a tenant in a landlord and tenant board file where you were working with the landlord. So that you can then make meaningful decisions if you want to represent that client or not. So the additional parties, to really summarize this, plays three important roles. One is to have your client-facing documents appropriately filled out, like the joint retainer and engagement letters, where you can have both names of parties involved. You can even use the additional parties to also associate other client-facing documents, such as invoices, if you're working with certain corporate clients, they may actually require you to send your invoices to a certain department, attention to another individual within the company. So by utilizing the additional parties, you can also associate the invoice to personnel so that all invoices get addressed to that particular individual or department. The second benefit, of course, is a benefit that we find a lot of our existing clients are certainly taking advantage of, and that is that of the filling of the court forms for certain silos of practice. And the third, of course, as we discussed, it highlights, based on the associations and relationships, the different conflicts that may arise within the representation of your firm. Okay? So once again, I welcome everyone who's joined us today. Today's webinar is being recorded and will be available for you to consume later, or actually as early as Monday next week, in our YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/uLawPractice. Today's webinar is not accredited for any CPD credits, but it's going to be a specific webinar that focuses on one of the highlighted features of the product, and we're going to be demonstrating this key capability as part of today's webinar. Okay? Like every other uLaw webinar, today's webinar has a specific agenda, and we're going to talk about the concept of additional parties and how it relates to a matter or a file. As I mentioned, we'll reiterate the top 3 benefits of the concept and how it's being utilized within the uLaw platform and how best it can benefit your practice. We'll take some examples such as retainer letters, client ID verification, where information once saved can be repurposed across all of these different documents, as I mentioned, both client-facing as well as court forms, and in some cases, jurisdictionally based financial forms. Information can be pre-populated. For example, intermatter trust transfer, or for a jurisdictional document, a Form 9A, which is a specific document in the province of Ontario, where every time you do a trust transfer from a trust account to a general account electronically, you are required as a legal professional to fill out this form that pretty much outlines the key information such as bank details and the reason for that particular transfer. Okay? So we pre-populate that information and we'll kind of take you through that example. And of course, the last but not the least, we'll spend the last 10-15 minutes of today's webinar to specifically focus and demonstrate these key capabilities. So here are some examples of additional parties, and of course there's more that you can add to this list, but some of the most commonly utilized additional parties for your attention. Examples such as an applicant, defendant, plaintiff, of course that's missing there, but plaintiff, defendant. So you have these parties, but imagine you have, in some cases, the opposing party. So you have a plaintiff and then you have a defendant, right? You have a landlord and you have a tenant. And you could have multiple tenants, multiple defendants, multiple landlords. So, of course, depending on the specific situation, you have multiple information that needs to be associated. Now, in the case of certain other silos of practice, like accident benefits, things of that nature, in criminal matters, the court forms often ask you for certain information, such as the police officer at the crime scene. You may have information pertaining to the insurance company that was involved, especially if it's an accident. Any health practitioner that was referred to as part of that certain matter requirement. And then we talked about the invoice to and the joint retainer as certain documents that are client-facing, where again, information is repurposed to fill out these individual documents. Okay? And if you look at some of the key areas where we repurpose this information, or areas of practice where we repurpose this information, includes starting with small claims. All the court forms is within small claims. And the general question is, how do we ensure that these forms are kept up to date? So typically what we do is we're constantly looking at the various different websites, the jurisdictional websites, and again, keep in mind that this particular feature is prevalent only for the forms, the court forms specifically, in the province of Ontario. Of course, all of the other client-facing forms and financial documents are relevant across other jurisdictions across the country, but the court forms are very specific to the province of Ontario today. And we're continuing to invest time and money to expand that feature across other provinces as well. But within the provinces of Ontario, the court form areas of practice that we specialize in include small claims. We spoke about small claims matters, plaintiff's claim. You could have those examples, defendant's claim. Then comes landlord and tenant, one of the most widely used forms by some of our clients, including, of course, we spoke about the eviction of a tenant increase, both ways, both representing the landlord as well as documents representing the tenant. And POA, or Highway Traffic Act, there are specific forms that are pertinent to that in the province of Ontario. So we do cover those. The family law, very important. Many of our clients do use the family law matters, especially if it's a simple matter. One of the things that we don't do yet is the calculation of information. So anytime if it's a divorce and if there's a complex calculation required as to how much of money parties owe each other or alimony that needs to be calculated, we don't do that yet. But if it's a simple divorce or simple separation file where the numbers are easier for you to calculate or compute and enter, we pretty much fill out all of the remaining information as it fits in the form. Okay, so many of our clients, when they deal with family law matters, separation or divorce, where it's relatively straightforward, it's a mutual consent, but these forms are still a formality that needs to be followed and information needs to be captured, they very much find it easy to use it through the uLaw forms engine. Criminal. There's quite a few forms that our clients today use, and as and when these forms get updated, typically we take 2 weeks as our service level agreement for that form to be updated. We're of course very informed both through our own research, sometimes through the clients telling us that something has changed because they're already in the line of action and they know that has changed. Acts and benefits, WSIB, as well as tribunals are some examples that we also cover as part of the court forms. So really wanted to use the slide chart to set the context for today's webinar, specifically focusing on the conditional parties and how that information, once stored, is repurposed across various other forms that you otherwise require to fill out. So before I jump into the actual demo version of things, for those who are joining us today and don't know who we are as a company, we're a Canadian company based out of Ottawa, and we're a legal accounting, practice management, as well as a business accounting software in the cloud, and we serve clients in the country of Canada across all provinces. If you have any further information that you would like to ask of us, you can either visit our website, reach out to us using the phone numbers on the website, or email us, and we'll be more than happy to respond back to you. In fact, we do offer kind of a no obligation 30-day trial that allows you to experience the platform. We walk you through onboarding sessions and do what it takes to get you comfortable with the software so that you can make a meaningful decision if you like the product or not to purchase it. Okay, so let me quickly shift gears from a presentation to, of course, the uLaw product. So we're a cloud-based solution. We're available on a web browser wherever there is access to internet, whether that's your, of course, various platforms and various browser configurations. The common question is, are we available on a Safari in a MacBook? And the answer is yes, very much so. And that's one of the interoperability advantages that we provide of being a cloud provider. In addition to being on the web in terms of using web browsers, we also have our own native apps, both on the iOS as well as on the Android platforms. So you are able to now dock it right out of your phone. You're able to import contact information. You can actually even make a phone call to your client and then docket that conversation right through the app, making it that much more efficient for you to maximize your time. Okay? This is a web version of it. It's very customizable. You can personalize this purely based on the use of our settings tab. I'm not going to spend any time doing that today. Please do visit our website as well as our YouTube channel for any additional webinars and videos for you to look at. One of the prerequisites, of course, for me to showcase this concept and this feature of additional parties, one of the prerequisites is, of course, saving one of the fundamentally important information, which is the contact information. And when we talk about the concept of contact, it is any individual or entity with a name, address, phone number, and any additional information that you can provide about that specific entity in relationship, of course, with your firm. And this could be an individual. This could be an enterprise or a company that you work with. It fundamentally begins to be a client. So, of course, one of the most common contact types is that of a client. Someone who is looking to have you represent them in a particular matter, right? But in addition to the clients, you also have the opportunity to work with individuals or come across contact information of other individuals who may be associated in that particular matter that you're representing. For example, if you have a client, and let's assume that it's a small claims matter, assuming that your client is the plaintiff, you may, in that particular instance, have the information or need the information of the defendant. You know, who is the other party that's involved? Who is the other party that your client wants you to oppose? And, of course, do what you do best and win that matter and win that case for your client. Another example commonly found is the representative of the opponent. So in this case, who is the person representing the defendant? If it's not a self-representation, you know, who's the other lawyer or paralegal involved who is working for the opposing party? Okay, so that's another information that's mostly captured. If there are multiple defendants, then of course you have multiple contact information for that defendant, and each defendant may have his or her own legal representation. So that's another unique example where you could have multiple legal representations or multiple representatives of the opponent. You fill out this information within the uLaw's contact database. Our patent pending technology repurposes that information to make it readily available for those three major advantageous areas that we spoke about early on. First, it prepares the information to be utilized for a conflict search. Okay, so right after you do a client intake, the Law Society does require you to do what's called as a conflict check. So to quickly check if there's any conflict in representing this individual client, Ryan Peter. If you had associated this individual in another matter as a party, uLaw will pick that up. So that's one of the first advantages of storing all of your contact information in our database. The second advantage, of course, is once you have this information, our technology prepares that data to be available in court forms. But there's, of course, a prerequisite before those court forms are generated. And that prerequisite is the association of parties and the contacts within a particular file. Okay? So for example, if I were to go into a particular matter, let's assuming I clicked on the matter button for Mr. Ryan. Of course, in a file, you're going to do all of the other important aspects of it, accepting a retainer, accepting, client payments, docketing your effort, invoicing the client, generating all of the matter-related compliance documents, etc. Right? So what is important is, if I can draw your attention to this tab called Additional Parties. So in this matter, Ryan versus Stella, which has already been created, which is a family law. Let's say this is a small claim because I already have a defendant situation going on. Okay. I have now added Mr. Sam Anderson as a defendant, as a party relationship within this matter. So if I click on this action and edit this item, you're going to notice that relationship. So I've got Sam Anderson, and I can repurpose that for other reasons. If I were to click on the Additional Parties button here, it also gives you a visual representation of the current relationships that have been matched within this particular matter. Okay, so for example, you know that and I'm logged in as this fictitious legal professional, Roger Moore. We know that Roger Moore is the representative. Now his client is one Mr. Ryan Peter. And we understand today, as it stands, Sam, because there is no other representative of the opponent, is representing himself. And Sam is the defendant in this particular matter. So with this association, if I were to generate a court form, because the court form requires information about the plaintiff, the defendant, etc., right? So now under the document generation tab, of course, we have what's called as court forms. And here you can see we have right from small claims to mortgage enforcement. If I were to click on the small claims tab, of course, it asks you for the document date. And here you can notice right from additional parties, right through to claim Schedule A, including notice of termination and garnishment. We have the court forms in Ontario for small claims. And the most often used document that we come across, of course, in this case, it's a plaintiff's claim. And if I were to choose plaintiff's claim, another important information, of course, is which courthouse are you, scheduled to be attached. So you could basically choose the courthouse. If there's already a previous claim number, certain court forms require that information. You can provide that. And if I were to just click on the download button, our technology repurposes all the relationships, the contact information behind those relationships. It looks at the most recent court form pertaining to the situation, which is that of a small claims matter. And each representation actually has, or court form has its own format. In this claim, in terms of a plaintiff's claim, this is a Word document. And that's something that we're very much aware of, and the product automatically recognizes the format that it should be in. So it pre-populates the small claims court. As you had mentioned, it has to be Ottawa. It picks up the right address. As you notice in certain forms, they do ask you for a claim number. So if you have that pre-populated either at the time of creation of the form, or even if you had provided a court file number within the matter level, that would have translated. Then has the information of, as you can notice, it's plaintiff number 1. There's only one plaintiff in this situation. So it's Mr. Ryan Peter. Now, how did it get all this information? It went uLaw, that is, searched up Ryan Peter, because that is the matter that we're working on, reviewed Ryan Peter's information. So you'd already previously provided that as a prerequisite when you added Ryan Peter as a client within our contacts database. So if I were to edit this information, you know this is his mailing address. So we make sure that we pick the mailing address as the correspondence address to be utilized within the court form. And that's the same address that's utilized here. Keep in mind, this is a Word document that is editable. So you can edit this information. So we give you a starting point to maximize the time and effort that you would otherwise required to just type this information from scratch. Again, not rocket science, but it's a definite time saver, especially if you're in the business of generating such forms on a more regular basis. It also includes the macros. So if you have any additional parties information filled out as part of 1A, you can just double click that. You can say it's checked, 10 points, and done. It beautifully puts that little checkbox in it. When you print it, it looks the way it's meant to be. You can digitally send this information as well. Now it then looks at the representative of the client, which is, again, this information here is mandated by the court form. The plaintiff's claim court form requires you to fill out the representative for this file. And it picks the information from settings. It knows you as the individual who's representing this client, because you are the one who's licensed to use uLaw, captures your mailing address information. Okay? And last but not the least, it looks at any other parties involved. So it looks at the defendant. If there are multiple defendants, then they are added to the additional parties. And that's something you can say I have added. So in this case, if additional plaintiffs were in fact part of this equation, you can add that. In this case, it's just one, so leave that empty. If multiple defendants were added, you check this. And when you add the defendants in our additional party, they would show up in the 1A form. Okay? Now, if you notice, there's a defendant information, and the court forms template does ask you to provide if there are any representatives for this defendant. If there aren't, if it's a self-representation, then of course it's by default left empty. Okay. Now let's kind of look at the dynamic nature of this feature. So let's say you just recognize that there's a representative for this particular client, or maybe you've already come across this individual. So that's where contacts again helps to fill this information just one time. For purposes of today's demo and for purposes of time, I'm going to highlight and draw your attention to this particular group. And these are groups that are created in uLaw, and you can add any particular client and you can add them into multiple groups. So if I click on representatives, here are some of the pieces of information of contacts. For example, Monica Chandler, you've got Robin Hood, Broadman Don. And maybe this is and you can see this is a paralegal, could be a lawyer, could be a legal representative who is working on this particular file. So you already have Don's information. If you didn't have it, you would enter it. So you can basically say, add new contact, add this contact as part of your representatives group. So this could be Mr. Brian Sharp. 115. Water Avenue. I'm going to mark this as the mailing address. You can add other information. So I'm going to basically say Mr. Brian Sharp is the legal representative of the opponent. Okay, so now I have saved Brian's information, but more specifically, I have created that contact information under the representatives group. So Brian is really not a client. Brian is not a coworker. He's not a vendor, at least not for this case yet. And he's not any other party. He is simply a representative that you may actually come across in other matters too. And you've just noticed my count went from 19 to 20. And if I went to representatives, I can either scan through my database and there's Brian Sharp. Okay. Now let me go back to my matter with Ryan Peter. And I see under additional parties, I have the defendant. And if I look at the mapping, it clearly states self-representation from Sam. Now let me add a party. I'm going to click on this Add Party button. And here are the various different party types under the Attention dropdown. So I'm going to click that. So of course you see the various standard nomenclature for the party types. You've got dependent, defendants, child, in the case of family law, caregiver, family doctor, health practitioner. If I just clicked on the alphabet R in my laptop's keyboard, it's going to take me directly into, of course, all the parties that start with R. And the first additional party type is that of the representative of the opponent. So I choose that as the party that I'm looking to add. And now I'm looking to add the individual contact, the contact information of that person. So this is Brian. So I can, again, search for B and go through this whole list. But this is a waste of time, so you could just go and search up. So there's Mr. Brian Sharp's information. I'm adding Brian Sharp as the representative of the opponent as a party under Ryan Peters' matter for the Ryan versus Stella small claims matter. This information is going to be loaded up. Our technology, the patent pending technology, then repurposes this information again dynamically. Okay. And now when I click on the mapping, and you can do this prior to even generating the form because you have a very clear visual representation of the parties and their relationships. How did I get here? I clicked on this little icon that says additional parties. Now you notice that it's not a self-representation anymore. There is a representative of the opponent, and his name is Mr. Brian Sharp. Okay? Now let me generate that same plaintiff's claim. Going back to my court forms, small claims court, I'm going to say this is a plaintiff's claim in the same courthouse of Ottawa. And I'm going to hit the download button so that we can have a comparison. So here is the previously generated form. And with this new information, as you should expect, this information gets populated automatically. Okay. All this information remains to be the same, but voila, you have Mr. Brian Sharp at 1345 Water Avenue, Toronto, Ontario. Further down, it looks at the date, and if there's any information that's specific that you could add saying, I'm actually looking for a principal amount of $3,000, you can actually enter that. Okay? So what I'm hoping to get across through this particular demonstration is how the association works and the prerequisite for that association. Okay? So the prerequisite to adding the additional parties in a matter to begin with is creating the information and saving it under your contacts database. once created for a client. Once you create the matter, you then add the additional parties. So prerequisite to even associating additional parties is then to create the file. Under a file, under the additional parties tab, you would then associate information of contacts you've already saved, visualize the actual relationship of these parties with specific to this matter, because this may change with other matters, right? And last but not the least, have the court forms generated. Well, the fact that you have Ryan Peters' information in this matter already, simple documents, as we mentioned, client-facing, you can click on the compliance document, and if I were to generate a client ID verification, now this has nothing to do with the court forms. These are client-facing documents, the documents that you provide to Ryan himself. There it is. Information has already been captured based on his contact information, the first advantage we spoke about. Once again, these are editable fields, and you can always expand on it as you feel fit. Or if you want to make this a one-time change, you can go back, and this is one of the important features of this particular functionality, or I would say one of the important aspects of this functionality is the dynamic nature of the feature itself. For example, if that information changes, any piece of information changes, all you have to do is edit that one time. So let's say I don't want to say ON. I want to go ahead and say it's Ontario, and I do have a postal code. And once saved, that information is updated, and the most recent information is always utilized across all documents. Why is that important? It's important because let's assume that your frontline staff have gathered that information. They just searched up Google, and you know what? They just found the particular client's postal code because they didn't collect it the first time, and they've updated it. As soon as they've updated it, doesn't matter whether it's yourself, other colleagues in the firm who are looking to generate the form, they automatically take advantage of the most recent updated information in your firm. Okay? So now if I go back to my matters, and I generate, let's say, the same compliance document of that of client ID verification, a very small thing, but of course you now see that this is Ontario and it's not ON anymore. Okay? What other documents can you look at? So if you look at a retainer letter, so let's generate a retainer letter for this client. Let's just say it's $600. I can generate this both in a PDF and Word so that you can make those necessary changes to that letter as you feel fit. Now this would also have the information of individual clients. It has Ryan Peter, his address, with the updated expansion of our province with the new postal code. Okay? So both client-facing as well as the court documents. Now let's say you represent Ryan again in a different matter. You can create a new matter for Ryan. And maybe this is a landlord and tenant board matter because he was so impressed with how you handled the small claims matter. He's come back to you for a second matter. And in this case, this could be Ryan versus Boris, which is a landlord and tenant board matter. You've retained the Ryan's contact information. You retained your information. Of course, with this new matter, you have to associate the new parties involved with specific to that matter. So you notice the additional parties just went blank. Again, the additional parties are specific to the matter or the file and not specific to the client. So now you're going to notice under Ryan Peter, you have two matters, and that's why the number 2. You have Ryan versus Boris, and you click on this drop down here. If I were to just quickly click on Ryan versus Boris, you're going to notice the drop down showing Ryan versus Stella, the previous matter for small claims. Okay? Now, let us say we have an invoice to generate. So we've looked at court documents. I'm going to get into some other examples of court documents because we've already created a sample list of that. But I'm just going to go to look at our one last client-facing document. We looked at the retainer letter, the engagement letter, similar. You could also utilize the same information for the invoices as well. So you can say attention as a party if you want this invoice to be sent to someone else. So maybe you want this information to send to Brian Sharp. You can then associate Brian, in addition to being the representative, is now also the person to whom you have to attention the invoices. So let us say, put a docket in. Actually, there's a fee cap on this individual matter, so I'm going to, or maybe not, let me go ahead and say. I'm going to toggle this to a flat rate. Let's say it's about $500. Now there's going to be a projected balance of 500 plus that the client now owes us. There you go. I'm going to go ahead and generate that invoice. Let me actually generate a preview. If you notice, you've got Ryan Peter, attention, Mr. Brian Sharp. Okay. We also have other types of parties. I can also change this association. So if I've made a mistake, it's really not attention. I can click on the edit. I can unlock that particular association of Brian Sharp as the attention party. So let me just go ahead and click unlock. I want to say yes. And you can change this to the invoiced to as well. You can now change that relationship, and it's so dynamic. Unless you have not closed this matter, you are always able to change that relationship within the contacts and the parties. So if now I were to generate a pre-bill, you are now going to notice that the individual's name is not available. It's Mr. Brian Sharp to whom this particular invoice is invoiced to. Typically, in a legal aid matter, this is a very common case, right? Okay. So we looked at how saving the contact information has given us the advantages for the conflict checks. It gives you the advantage of client-facing documents. It also gives you a big advantage when it comes to filling out court forms in the province of Ontario, of course. And we looked at small claims and the plaintiff's claim as a very specific example. Okay. Now let's look at some other examples. So I've taken the liberty to actually create these associations just to save us time, so I can show you some of the varieties. So I've got Mr. Jonathan Form, who's a client. I've got various different matters, up to about 13 different matters or 11 different matters for him. If I were to look at a landlord and tenant board matter, let me take a rent eviction. So I've got Mr. Jonathan Form, who's my client. And when I say myself, I'm Roger Moore, the legal representative of Jonathan Form, who's the client. The fact that I've associated Emma Brown as the tenant, uLaw automatically has the artificial kind of smartness to understand that Jonathan is then the landlord. Unless you have another landlord or Jonathan's wife or partner, friend, then you can actually add another, you can add a party, and basically add another landlord as well. Okay. Now Emma also has a representative, that of Stefan. I click on this particular matter. Now you have the association. If there are multiple individuals involved, they would all show up at the bottom here. Now I use the same association, just like small claims, but instead I use the landlord and tenant board, LATB forms. I say I want to apply to evict the tenant for non-payment. Okay. And we do recognize that some forms in the N series have changed recently, and we're already working on it, and should be available with that 2-week SLA. So if I'm going to choose L1 as the form, I'm going to hit download, and you can notice it's brought in the claim number from the court file number that's already populated. So it's already pre-populated that. Generate download. And the LATB forms, unlike the small claims, are generated as a PDF. So this is an editable PDF, as they call it. And just like your document, Word document, you can basically go ahead and double click on this. Did you give the tenant an N4 notice? You could say, yes, I did. Are you applying after the termination date? Say, yep. Is he still in possession or she in possession? Yep. Right, so you can go through that questionnaire. And these are all, of course, templates provided by the jurisdictional governing body. And if you were to look at the rental unit covered, it's going to take it from the address information we already have, which is 78 Queen Street. And here is the more general information, which is the landlord's application. It has the landlord's information, Jonathan Form, his particular address, 980 Terrace Street. Of course, how do we get that? Going back to our contacts. When we save Jonathan Form as the client, just like Ryan Peter, and I know I'm repeating myself, but I'm hoping to make this as clear as possible. If I were to search up for, let's say, Mr. Jonathan Form, that is his mailing address, 89 Terrace Street. And that's the information that's repurposed here. Okay? Got this phone number across different phone numbers, day phone number, evening, and fax number. How cool is that, right? Filling out exactly within that little box provided. Even his email address, even as difficult as an underscore. And then you've got the tenant's information, Emma Brown. And if there are multiple tenants, as you notice, you could have those information filled out. You've got the particular rental unit in which Emma is staying right now. And this is where you have to add value further to this form beyond the information that we have. The rent the tenant owes me up, right? You're going to basically say what is it that you're looking to get out of this case. And here, but last but not the least, you've got the legal representative Roger Moore's information, which of course we know we got it from our settings. Okay? All right. Let's look at another example. So that was the landlord and tenant board, one of the most widely used court forms in uLaw for automated court form filling. Let's look at a accident benefits matter. So this is a neck injury that Jonathan Form had in a road collision. And I'm going to go ahead and basically do a statutory accident benefits. So let's say I'm applying for accident benefits. I can go ahead and generate that court form. So you've got all the information filled out, you've got the legal representation. Now, if you added information about the officer, the police, which you could do so clearly, you've got the health practitioner's information. That's where you have the accident details, name of the health professional, Emma Brown. How do we get that information? It's because of this association called health practitioner. Now, if I added another party, and again, I'm not going to do it for purpose of today's time, but if, let's say I had another party by the name police officer and associate another individual, then of course, this particular area of this form, where it asks for the officer name, all of that will be filled out as well. So the more information you provide about the parties involved, the more automated the court forms become. Okay? In some court forms even, there are some calculations like age. They ask you for the age, and we even calculate that based on the date of birth. So you can see we filled out date of birth of Jonathan form. That comes from the contact information where we actually do have his date of birth. We also calculate the age accordingly. All right, so that's a action benefits form. Let me look at a more convoluted situation. And there you go. This is what a multi-relationship diagram looks like. You've got legal representation. You even got Adam Sandler as a substitute decision maker. Okay, that's what Adam Sandler is. And there you go. Maybe that's how you have Adam as the name of the applicant who's representing Jonathan form in this case. Because Jonathan is not in his best health to do this. Let's look at a family matter maybe. You could do WSIB wrongful dismissal, speeding tickets, 90 at 60. You can hit red light tickets. I'm going to do this family matter, Jonathan versus Emma. And look at that. You have quite a few parties that have been associated. You've got Emma Brown, who's the respondent. So you have the applicant, and then you have the respondent. Just like you have a plaintiff and a defendant, a landlord and a tenant, right? So it's the applicant and the respondent. You've got the respondent's representative. You've got another respondent, who's Hudson Brown, and Roger Moore is actually representing Hudson Brown. And then you've got joint retainer of Emma Brown. Of course, Hudson is the child. And you have multiple children. You've got 3 children, and their representative. Pretty convoluted. So let's look at that diagram here. There you go. You've got Roger Moore representing Jonathan client and his first daughter, maybe Hudson Brown. You've got Jonathan Form, and you've got the child, and Jane Smith, who represents Jane Brown. And on the other side, you have Emma Brown, who's the respondent, and you have Stefan, who is her representative. If I go ahead and go into my court forms, there you have for family, and let us say I choose a simple divorce. Okay. Courthouse. Keep in mind we also have not only the Ontario Court of Justice, we have the Superior Court of Justice and the Family Court branch. Okay. Once again, the family law form, all that information is being captured, repurposed, and is being generated based on the latest version of it. Let me just close out of these tabs and make this easier. And you know that the family law is, again, a Word document. So, again, a different template to deal with. And there you go. You've got the court file number. This is, of course, a totally different template. You've got the address of the Ottawa courthouse. You can make this as a joint divorce or simple. You've got Jonathan form. You've got Roger Moore as the representative. We've got the respondents here, Emma Brown and Hudson Brown. You've got their corresponding representatives as well. You've got Mr. Stefan Edbrook, who's the lawyer, Roger Moore, who's Hudson's lawyer. You've got the age calculated right from the information you've provided for both the applicant and the respondent. You've got the birth date filled out, the residency, and even better, you've got the children's information already filled out. And then you can say who they're living with, the name of the relationship with. So this is where you can further add to this form beyond what we know. Okay? Again, you're going to specifically talk about the claims specific to this file, and you sign this and date this. So a good 85%, if sometimes more than that, is filled out. Of course, we're going to fill out the details of, the amount and things of that nature. Okay? So with that, of course, I'll try and wrap this up as we close today's webinar. Today's webinar was specifically meant to talk about the topic, of course, as someone who joined us had asked us. The topic is uLaw handling additional parties. It's not a CPD session, but it was a session that was meant to showcase a very important time-saving feature within the uLaw product around additional parties. We looked at the prerequisite of adding contact information, grouping them accordingly so that it's easier for you to recognize their relationship with regards to your firm, creating a file or a matter for the client, and being able to utilize the additional parties tab to bring this association in by adding the pre-saved contact information as parties using the Add Party button here and choosing the type of party and the name that's already saved. We looked at how once you do associate the parties, you could use our Additional Parties button to start to visualize that relationship before you can then generate the court form based on the specific need and area of practice for which you're generating. Okay? We looked at examples. Again, we've done right from small claims court to landlord. We also do POHDA, WSIB, accident benefits, tribunals, family, criminal. So maybe I'll just do one last criminal matter before we close for the day. So, under influence charges, there's an applicant who is the Crown Attorney of Canada. The co-accused, who's Emma Brown, who maybe was in the car with Jonathan, and they actually have a public prosecutor as a representative for Emma. So I create a criminal matter, and I'm just going to say application form 1. This is, again, a PDF. So you can see how, based on the type of form it is, the format's changed, pieces of information are repurposed. Okay? And with that, I will draw close to this particular webinar. I will request you to use the chat window if you want to ask me specific questions regarding today's webinar, or if you have further questions regarding this, you can also email us at support@uLawPractice.com. I'm just going to quickly type that into the chat window. And for those who are currently already using the uLaw product, you can, of course, do so by using the help button and just emailing us right from here, or utilizing, of course, the email address. So thank you once again for joining me, and I'll open the floors for any questions that you may have. Oh, there's no extra, so the question is if there's an extra cost for the particular feature. There is no extra fee or cost for this feature. It's part of the package, and it's all available to you already to take advantage of. Well, thank you for the feedback. I'm glad it was informative. So the question is, how do I get to the additional parties? So as soon as you create a file or a matter, these tabs show up. So unless you create the matter, you're not going to see this tab. Okay? So a prerequisite, as I mentioned, was to create the file so that the additional parties tab automatically is reflected. And a prerequisite for the add party is that this contact information is previously existing in our contacts database. So if I'm going to choose a random name, say Yokozuna, right? That would not show up because Yokozuna does not exist in our database. But the minute I add that piece of information into my database, it's made available to be associated as a party. And that's how that's done. I can say add okay. Once I add that information, I can associate that individual as a party. Okay? Well, if there aren't any further questions, at least for today, I thank everyone who joined me for today's webinar. It is being recorded, will be available to you by Monday, and I look forward to seeing you in my next webinar. Thank you, everyone. Have yourself a great weekend. Take care.